Cody, thank you so much for joining me in the LSI studio today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to speak.
Tell me a little bit about what you're doing at DermaSensor.
Sure, happy to. So DermaSensor's developed the world's first point-and-click skin cancer detection tool. Our goal is really to improve access to effective skin cancer checks. And so our approach to doing that has really been to equip primary care providers. So PCPs are the most accessible, most common kind of provider. I believe it was Medicare stats that patients visit PCPs about 6 times more than dermatologists, but of course they're not specialists in assessing skin. So our focus is really on upskilling PCP's ability to effectively assess and detect skin cancer and correctly refer that to dermatologists.
So does that mean that if the general patient is going to identify a worrying skin lesion, a mole, or anything of that nature, their first instinct is actually to go to the general physician instead of to a dermatologist?
So a lot of dermatologists comment that actually more dermatologic care is provided by primary care than by dermatologists, just because there's 20 times as many of them, about 250,000 primary care physicians and about 10,000 dermatologists. So, but PCPs often are not the ones that are necessarily diagnosing or treating whatever the condition is, right? But they're often that initial assessment, and so they're often kind of, like with so many specialties, they're that front line and having to make those triage decisions. But skin is notoriously challenging. Studies show that PCPs are referring or biopsying 30 to 50 patients for every one melanoma. And so, there's a lot of unnecessary referrals, but there's also studies that have shown PCPs miss up to half of skin cancer and think, no, that's okay, that's not concerning, right? And they're just typically doing maybe a few second visual analysis, just looking at the lesion, and really that's been unchanged. Our technology uses a type of spectroscopy, totally light-based, so completely non-invasive and harmless, that pulses hundreds of wavelengths of light on the lesion, measures the reflectance, and so the different light wavelengths are sensitive to things like nucleus size, chromatin, cellular and subcellular characteristics that change when lesions are malignant. And so basically the device, touch to a mole, whole process is around 30 seconds. And then you as a provider get a result to better inform that referral decision.
So is it then actually able to see if the lesion is malignant, or is it more helping with the triage of the patient to say, this lesion looks, it's giving us some concerning feedback, concerning data. Let's now take the next step to refer you to a dermatologist.
It's more the latter. Yeah, so it's not a definitive diagnosis. The gold standard for that, which we're not at all trying to replace, is pathology. So do a biopsy, it's sent off, and dermatopathologists look at that under a microscope and kind of identify whether that's cancerous or not. But there's a couple steps that get to that point, right? Lesion presents that you can imagine internist, family physician, there's primary care physicians that work at retail health clinics, right? So it's often not their primary complaint, like the reason they went there. They have bad upper respiratory tract issues, or there for an annual wellness visit, like, oh, by the way, my wife or my partner or husband, noticed this mole on my back, or, I think this weird kind of light lump on my leg is like changing size, and you know what I mean? So it's often kind of brought up as a secondary issue, and that the average PCP just has a few hours of training in med school on assessing skin lesions for cancer. And what's challenging is, and they're the first ones to say, like, yeah, it's tough being good, at assessing skin lesions and their risk for cancer, because there's no feedback loop. We're typically referring the patient off, but we don't photograph the moles and then get the diagnosis back. So dermatologists who almost always do a biopsy, they assess a lesion, it has some risk, I'm gonna do a biopsy, and they get the definitive diagnosis back typically 2 to 4 days later. So you get better, right? Because you get used to seeing lesions, like, oh, okay, that one was malignant, that one was not. And especially when you're doing skin all day, every day, and you have that feedback loop, they get really effective at assessing lesions for cancer. Whereas PCPs, not only do they not see skin conditions as much as a dermatologist, obviously, but they're also typically just referring patients out. But it's those referral decisions the PCP is making that we're able to improve. Like, that's our goal, helping them detect more skin cancer. The other aspect the device can help with, I think, is prioritizing referral, right? If you as a provider, like, okay, the lesion's a bit suspicious, I want to refer it, but you also get, a positive result from the device, like, okay, actually, and you message that to the patient, like, you really need to get a dermatologist. Maybe you send a note to the dermatologist saying, hey, can you get this patient in the next month? There's health systems that we've spoken to, I won't name names, that have 8-month wait times for dermatologist visits. And so they've implemented telederm. They try to, like, okay, can we maybe have sort of prioritization protocol somehow? And so that's something we think the device could help with also.
You probe the lesion with the device. Is there any software component that's making sense of all this data that's coming back?
A big benefit of the device is that you do not need an active Wi-Fi connection. There's not photos that have to be uploaded and shared and et cetera. So the algorithm was developed on thousands of biopsy lesions, and each lesion we take multiple scans of. So the algorithm was developed on thousands of lesions and over 10,000 scans of lesions. So that algorithm is like locked and loaded because it's cancer detection. So this is not a constantly evolving, changing algorithm, right? You kind of develop the algorithm, lock it, conduct these studies, show its performance. I think every couple of years we may want to work with the FDA and say, okay, now instead of thousands of lesions, we have tens of thousands of lesions, so we can improve the algorithm's performance significantly, which is definitely exciting for us because it is a brand new technology type. There's no medical device on the market right now that uses this type of spectroscopy. So not only is the performance strong now, but I think what's arguably just as, if not more exciting, is that we know there's room to grow. But the software side is relatively straightforward. It's really just the local, program computers, the chips inside the handheld device that capture and process the spectroscopy data and provide that result all there locally.
You mentioned that the device doesn't require a Wi-Fi connection to operate and function. Is that an intentional decision to help enable access and make this device usable in certain, let's say, underprivileged areas or things like that?
100%. Yeah, a big part of our focus is access, as I mentioned earlier, and our thinking was, okay, not needing a strong active Wi-Fi connection could definitely help with that. The device is Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled, so it's helpful to periodically connect. For example, the device storage can basically fill up the local storage, and so our backend software, right, when you sync it with Wi-Fi, can pull all that data off the device to make sure there's enough local storage and programming to run effectively. So periodically it needs to connect, but it does not need to constantly be connected to Wi-Fi to operate.
Are there any competing technologies at the point of care like this? I know dermatoscopes are frequently used, but I'm pretty sure it's just they're visualizing with a microscope.
Dermatoscopes are basically polarized magnifying glasses. Like, not many primary care providers use it. The last study I saw was 8%, because it takes a lot of training. And so PCPs, obviously there's thousands of different diseases. They're kind of responsible for initially evaluating and triaging. And so spending tens or hundreds of hours to learn some new visualization technique just for one disease type, not many of them do it. Honestly, the only relevant thing in primary care is really teledermatology. So besides dermatoscopes, visual assessment like ABCDEs, is teledermatology. So kind of taking a photo, sharing it with the dermatologist, and a lot of health systems have implemented teledermatology specifically for skin lesion assessments. I often kind of explaining or clarifying to folks that there's not a single image or optical-based tool or device of any kind that's FDA cleared or approved that provides any type of automated or immediate risk assessment available to dermatologists, to primary care providers, to patients. There's nothing that uses photos or light like our device available right now. So we hope to be the first, and we'll also be the first available for primary care providers, which is our focus. Because I think in the popular media, there's a lot like, oh, using photos, applying algorithms. So there's like publications, and there's some like buzz in the popular media and kind of different types of photos, and people come up with acronyms to like try to sound like it's some exciting new novel thing. But yeah, there's a couple apps that were shut down by the federal government a few years ago because they were on the App Store being like, oh, we give like a high, medium, low rating for melanoma. That's a highly regulated FDA medical device just because it's like on a smartphone.
Yeah.
Because the camera is hardware.
Yeah, I imagine there are also several limitations to using a camera-based approach for teledermatology. Lighting, all these things can affect how an AI algorithm would evaluate an image. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about the clinical research you guys are doing and where that is going to be taking you in the near future?
Sure, and I'm glad you mentioned that actually. Yeah, a challenge in the photo-based world is not only image quality, primary care physician, but certainly dermatologist, yeah, capturing high quality photos, especially for evaluating a lesion, maybe like a rash or acne or something, but getting a high resolution, like we've seen studies that have excluded like 40% of the pictures in the study because the algorithm didn't run it well on them or whatever their quality definition, it didn't make the cut, right? So that's what's great about us. Like you don't need to like shave the area because there's hair there. That the probe tip kind of just touches directly to the mole. And another aspect is because it's not visual based and like surface level photos, we haven't seen any indication that patient skin type affects performance. So we haven't done a study specifically like powered to say, okay, darker skin types and lighter skin types, the device performs the exact same. But the large studies we have done, so we just presented 2 of the 4 major studies that we submitted to FDA at the American Academy of Dermatology, actually just a few days ago. Over 2,000 lesions, I think around 1,400 patients, and we didn't see any sign of any notable performance difference between darker skin types and lighter skin types, which is really important because there's lots of publications that about how darker skin types physicians and algorithms based on photos have a tougher time with because neither the algorithm nor physicians are trained as well on darker skin types. So in terms of bringing that kind of equity and again, improved access, we think our technology can help a lot with that.
In addition to the clinical work you're doing and bringing this product to market, what are you trying to achieve by being in an event like LSI?
Yeah, I mean, really connecting with potential partners, right? There's some corporate folks here that have, large relevant sales force, right? I think the exciting thing for us is that there's hundreds of thousands of primary care providers that could benefit from our device. The challenge is how do you access them, right? We're a 6-person startup. We don't have 1,000 sales reps, and we're not going to in a year to kind of access and kind of promote our product to everyone. So thinking about that, certainly investors are a big focus. And yeah, I think also a lot of the panels, really interesting kind of knowledge sharing, especially given the macroeconomic environment right now from a fundraising standpoint, because we're certainly going to want to raise significant funds. We've raised $27 million to date, and I'll probably do another significant financing to fund our U.S. launch.
You were on a panel earlier this week about the next generation of founders. As a younger founder, are you finding that there are any specific challenges that you are facing?
Yeah, I think some things definitely, I kind of the estimate or level of complexity, I was off the mark. Sometimes overestimated, typically underestimated. So for example, clinical CSRs, clinical study reports, like the write-ups of clinical studies, kind of spoke with a couple folks like, okay, those don't seem that hard. Way more involved and complex than I had expected. So that resulted in an extremely busy few months last year for me and a couple other team members. There's probably like 20 people involved in the FDA submission, but a kind of few person sort of core team. Yeah, so I think definitely, I joined the company when I was 27. So definitely some things in retro. I mean, hindsight's 20/20, and I think regardless your experience level. But yeah, I think if I had another decade under my belt, or now joined a similar startup, I think would have made some better decisions along the way. But I think fortunately, like potential missteps or major missteps, most of those were avoided due to kind of the active involvement of our board. So we've got great board members. So there's a couple co-founders that started the company in 2009. So really kind of identified the early technology at Boston University. Dr. Maurice Ferre was on the board of trustees there. And so connected with a brilliant researcher, Professor Irving Bijou, who invented this field of spectroscopy. And kind of had this initial 30-pound microwave-sized device that they worked with his lab to develop. And that's what I was handed when I joined in 2016. So there'd been some early studies done kind of showing proof of concept that, like other cancer types, it could also work well for skin. And so the goal was to kind of miniaturize that 30-pound microwave-sized device down into the little 1-pound device it is today. And Maurice has had 2 exits. First company sold to GE. Second company took public and sold to Stryker for $1.6 billion. It's called Mako Surgical. So having him, Chris Dewey, Fred Moll, a few other very seasoned medical device entrepreneurs and executives, Ivan Delevic, David Matlin, involved, and certainly quarterly board meetings, but also can call or email whenever I need to, and when we're in a tricky situation or a question comes up that some guidance is helpful on. So they've been great.
So then the key takeaway there being building a strong team around you of both seasoned players and young innovators can result in a very successful operation.
Great summary. I think definitely if you're kind of a first-time founder and CEO, especially in our highly regulated industry, having some seasoned folks around you, not just for insights and advice, but also, hiring the right people, getting the right kind of legal and consulting folks involved. It can be overwhelming. Like, how do I navigate? There's dozens of recruiting firms I could work with. What are good ones? And so I think having those kinds of folks involved, whether they're investors or advisors. So, we recently brought on, because Maurice and a lot of those individuals I mentioned have really focused on surgical related tools like surgical robots. But we're a bit of a novel, right? Point of care, primary care triage tools. There's not really many of those. So we recently brought on 2 commercial advisors. Steve Mayer, he's the ex-CEO of Walsh Allen. So definitely a lot of experience and knowledge when it comes to primary care devices. And also Jason Bollett is the co-founder of Echo Health, which is the AI stethoscope. So AI-enabled stethoscope that automatically evaluates stethoscope sounds for AFib, heart murmur, et cetera. And they're in use by about 350,000 clinicians, mostly in the U.S. So I think we've got a lot of great folks that help with the development stage, and now some people involved that really know these kind of primary care tools very well and like how to get them adopted on a widespread basis.
Sounds like you've built a very impressive team to help you bring this product to market.
I'm trying. Hopefully it'll do the trick. We'll see.
I think you're going to have great success. Thanks so much for stopping by and telling me about the work you're doing at DermaSensor. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me.